Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I am your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So, the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. In this episode, we are back to Akbar and Birbal. We have covered several Akbar-Birbal stories before. Check out the links in the show notes if you want to hear them. These stories are all set in medieval India, most of which was ruled by Emperor Akbar. If you haven't heard the previous ones, that's totally fine because all of these stories stand alone. All you need to know is that Akbar was a real historical person. He was a Mughal emperor. He ruled India over 500 years ago. Birbal was a minister in his court, and the smartest of them all. He was a real historical person too. He was the Jeeves to Akbar's Bertie Wooster, or Sherlock Holmes to Watson. There was really no problem that Birbal could not solve, and no question that he could not answer in a clever way. We'll see him solve two such problems today. The first story is about a quarrel between neighbors. Let's call them Dhurt and Padosi. Dhurt was a sly person, just like the meaning of his name. It literally means sly. And Padosi lived next door to Dhurt, as you might expect from the translation of his name, which literally means neighbor. Now, Padosi had been trying to grow crops in his yard, and it was not working out for him. He did wonder why his neighbor had so much more success than him. He straight up asked Dhurt about it one day. "Howdy, neighborino. How come your garden looks so much better than mine?" Dhurt pondered for a moment. "You know what they say about the grass being greener on the other side of the fence? Although, in this case, I have to admit, it is certainly greener on my side. Now, I think the difference is because you haven't been irrigating it." "How can I?" asked Padosi. "We haven't had rain in weeks." "How do you irrigate your garden without rain?" "Ah, dear boy, I just store the water in my WELL." He indicated a stone structure near the edge of the property. "Well, well, well, what have we here?" asked Padosi. "It's my water economizer of limitless length, WELL." "Well, so that's what it is then," said Padosi. "I thought you started constructing a tower and gave up quickly. But it can't really be of limitless length. If it were, you'd bore clear through the other side of the earth." "I know," said Dhurt. "It's the only acronym I could find. Anyway, I'm filing a patent for it. I hope it's well received." "You couldn't give me one, could you?" asked Padosi. "I'll pay you 50 gold coins." That was far too tempting an offer for Dhurt. This was an opportunity to trick his very gullible neighbor. "Oh, I don't know. It's limited edition, one of its kind and all that," he said. "I'll give you 100 gold coins," said Padosi, desperation showing on his face. "Oh, all right," said Dhurt finally, "but only because I let you talk me into it. The well is yours." As we live in a world where property transfers take weeks and sometimes months, it might seem strange that Padosi was able to transfer the well ownership from Dhurt in just a few minutes. All it took was a quick seal of approval on stamp paper that Dhurt had lying around conveniently, and a couple of signatures from two passers-by who agreed to act as witnesses. Padosi was excited to get his garden back in shape. He immediately made for the well with a bucket to pull out water. And that's when Dhur stopped him. Padosi, what do you think you're doing? I'm just about to pull water from the well to, well, water my plants, Padosi replied. Dhurt whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. He even admits to stealing. Louder still, and a little sternly, he said, Padosi, you must not take what doesn't belong to you. You bought the well, but not the water in it. The water in it is mine. Padosi's jaw dropped. He didn't have an answer to that. He read the sale agreement again, and Dhurt was right. It made no references to the water. But, he stammered. No ifs and buts, Dhurt said. I'll let it slide this time. But go away and never steal from me again. If Dhurt thought that he had made easy money and Padosi would not fight back somehow, he was wrong. Padosi did fight back, but not by playing a trick of his own. He instead appealed to the authorities. It was rumored that Emperor Akbar could be trusted to deliver justice in situations like these. Padosi showed up in court and appealed to the emperor on grievance day. He presented his case to Akbar, who sat there thinking. Akbar thought that this was a rather tricky case. On the one hand, Dhurt had done everything by the book. The law was on his side. But Padosi had been clearly misled. There was no doubt about it. Akbar just couldn't decide. He began to get a little nervous as all eyes in the court stared at him, waiting for a decision. Sorry, now they're calling me, so I have to go. Birbal, take care of this childishly simple problem, won't you? With that, Akbar hurried out of the courtroom. That was a close shave, he thought to himself. A minute longer, and everyone would have said Akbar can't make a simple judgment. Akbar did hang around just outside the courtroom, listening to the rest of the conversation. Birbal spoke up. Padosi, like the emperor said, this is a childishly simple problem. You should not be bothering the emperor to solve these problems for you. Now all you have to do is to go back and ask Dhurt for the rent. Rent? What are you talking about? Asked Padosi. For the well, of course. He's storing his water in your well, isn't he? So I'd say he should be paying you some kind of storage fees. Maybe amounting to at least what you had to pay for the well itself. But you are free to set it significantly higher if you choose. You know, with a harsh economic outlook and everything. And if he doesn't like it, he's welcome to remove his water from your well and warn him never to store it there again. That's Birbal for you. Although I have to admit, Padosi should really have thought about this on his own. maybe there weren't enough opportunities for people to learn how to think outside of the box back then. Oh well, the second story is a little different. This one was a harder problem to solve. It begins with a bedtime routine. If you were wondering how an emperor sleeps at night, wonder no longer. The answer is that a dedicated crew was in charge of every aspect of the emperor's sleeping arrangement. There was a maid in charge of the bed, there was a maid in charge of lights, another in charge of the emperor's teddy bear and security blankets, and a maid in charge of the mosquito repellent. Yeah, all funded by taxpayers. One day, the maid in charge of the bed, whose name was Alcy by the way, was running a little bit late. By the time Alcy clocked in, most of the other maids were done with their chores for the night. Hurry up, said the maid in charge of selecting a lullaby. Most of the other maids were done and exited the scene one by one. Alcy got to work quickly and arranged the sheets and pillows exactly the way Akbar liked them. When she was done, she looked around. She was all alone in Akbar's bedroom. Alcy was tempted to try something that she had always been very curious about. She had wondered what it would be like to sleep on this awesome bed. Her own bed was a straw mat on the hard, uneven floor of the hut she lived in. Alcy figured she could lie down on Akbar's bed, just for a minute, and then she would make the bed again. No one would ever know. Unfortunately for her, that's not how things worked out. The first part of her plan went okay. She lay down and closed her eyes, but where she struggled was in the part about getting up after a minute. And when Akbar entered his bedroom that night, she was still snoring. "What is going on here?" thundered the emperor. "Mummy, I'll have breakfast in bed," muttered Alcy in her sleep. Akbar's rage crossed boiling point. He ordered the guards to take Alcy away. But when he asked for the maid who was in charge of his bed so that she could make his bed again, he was surprised when the guards simply turned around and brought Alcy back. This enraged Akbar even further. If she had been a noble living on taxpayer income who had snuck in and grabbed a little shut-eye, that was still something the emperor could tolerate. But a mere commoner? No way. Alcy must be punished. She must be put to death. Alcy was dejected. The few minutes of relaxation she had came at a terrible price. She did the only thing that might save her in these circumstances. She appealed to Birbal. Birbal heard her patiently, and by the time she concluded her story, Birbal already had an idea. "I've got an idea," he said, "but it will spoil the story if it's revealed at this point in the episode. So I'll whisper it to you instead." He did, and for the first time since the incident, Alcy actually smiled. All would be well. So as Birbal had suggested, Alcy began acting on the plan. At 4 a.m., the time that Birbal had suggested, Alcy began wailing at the top of her voice. She did have a loud voice, and as the prison was right next to the palace, Akbar was woken up by her cries. Rather than being angry at being woken up, Akbar was curious. He had Alsi summoned to him immediately. I know you're being executed in a few hours, but that's nothing to cry about, is it? He asked the maid, never himself having been in a similar situation. Your Majesty, I'm not crying about my own execution. I'm crying for you, explained Alsi. For me? Why? What are you worried about? He asked. Well, I was thinking of your situation, Your Majesty. I slept in the bed for 10 minutes, and God punished me. I was sentenced to death. But you? Your Majesty has been sleeping in that bed for years. Just imagine what punishment God has in store for you. That amused Akbar, who could be a little severe at times, but was always inclined towards an out-of-the-box intellectual explanation. Like the very arbitrary assumption that time spent in bed was directly proportional to the punishment, irrespective of any other factors. I know, sounds weird, but this kind of logic appealed to the analytical mindset that Akbar strived to cultivate. He let off Alsi with a stern warning not to do it again. But for his peace of mind, he did verify with her that it was Birbal whom she had got the idea from. It only cemented Birbal's place in Akbar's mind as the smartest cookie of all time. Well, those were the two main stories I had for today. As a bonus, I'll mention one additional mini story. These are in the typical Akbar-Birbal story format. Akbar usually asks a question, many attempt a response, but it's Birbal who invariably gets the right answer every time. And one day, Akbar was curious. Who was greater, God or himself? It was a tricky question. Everyone who knew how religious Akbar was would have leaped to the conclusion that the answer he expected was that God was obviously greater. God can do anything, Your Majesty, said one sycophant. God created everything and controls everything, said another. Birbal had a different opinion. Your Majesty, you are greater than God, of course, he said, to the general astonishment of the whole court. Some ministers were sure that now Birbal would finally be getting it. They were lucky to witness Birbal's fall from grace. Akbar would not tolerate what he would see as an insult of God. And Akbar indeed seemed to be teetering in that direction. But he did ask Birbal to explain himself. Birbal, is there anything I can do that God can't? Yes, Your Majesty, said Birbal. There is certainly one thing you can do that God cannot. You can banish someone from your realm, your empire. But if God wants to kick someone out of the universe, well, it's just impossible, by definition. Yet another clever reply. The royal scorekeeper, tracking witty remarks, put another little notch on the Birbal side of the scoreboard. The other half of the scoreboard, representing all other ministers, was completely empty. All the notches were on Birbal's half of the board. But the scorekeeper wasn't going to complain about it. It would just make his job redundant. That's all I have for now. In the next episode, we'll learn some wisdom from the Buddha. I'll be back with Jatak Tales. If you have comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories that you would like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet @sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. I'll see you next time.